Hello, and welcome to the Daily Debrief Downloads Week in Review, a special episode within our audio series walking you through the biggest, the most impactful, and the most downright bizarre news stories from the Oceanographic newsroom. I'm Rob Hutchings, news editor here at Oceanographic Magazine, and for this episode, I shall be leading us on a globe-spanning tour of the leading stories as we gallivant across the headlines to revisit the developments that have been keeping the news desk busy this week. Now, there's no denying that the biggest news story this week comes with a stark warning, an express of deep concern from scientists now worried that a fast-spreading pathogen found to be the cause of mass deaths of sea urchins across swathes of the ocean should be recognized as a severe and violent global pandemic that could impact all marine life. Concerns were triggered among an international team of marine researchers when it was discovered that a pathogen causing large-scale sea urchin deaths along the coast of the Red Sea is the same pathogen responsible for a mass mortality event off the coast of Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. This finding has raised further fears still that the disease, which is a waterborne celiate, could spread further and into the Pacific Ocean. Led by scientists from the University of Tel Aviv, these researchers now warn that this is in fact a highly aggressive global pandemic affecting sea urchins with a far wider potential to become a first-rate ecological disaster. This all sounds concerning and very dramatic, but just how damaging could this pathogen outbreak among sea urchins be for the wider environment? For our answer, we only need to look back to 1983. Sea urchins are vital to the health of the coral reef. They act as a control species, feeding on algae and preventing it from overgrowing and suffocating the coral as it competes for sunlight. Meanwhile, we know coral reefs harbour an abundance of ocean life, vital to the fragile ecology that makes up the marine environment. Recalling a mysterious disease that wiped out most of the diadema sea urchins in the Caribbean some 40 years ago, Dr. Omri Bronstein, the current study's lead author, has been able to draw strong parallels between the events of 1983 and today. He notes that without regulation from sea urchins, the coral reef ecosystem gradually shifted to one dominated by algae. 40 years later, he says, and neither the sea urchin population nor the coral reef have recovered. So what does the situation look like on the seabed today? Well, it's not good. Knocking out a species in any ecosystem has long reverberating consequences. When that species is a keystone of the ecosystem, like sea urchins are, the consequences can be devastating. 3 years ago, scientists first spotted the re-emergence of the disease in the Caribbean. In 2023, Dr. Bronstein was the first to identify mass mortality events among long-spined sea urchins, a close relative to the Caribbean sea urchin, in the Red Sea. Within a few short hours of recording the outbreak, Dr. Bronstein watched a healthy population of sea urchins turn, in his words, into crumbling skeletons. In locations like the Eilat and the Sinai, mortality rates for infected sea urchins hit 100%. The concern is, without an international response to the crisis, similar scenes could be witnessed as far as the Pacific Ocean. So what's being done to address this situation? For sea urchins already infected, there is no cure. The focus instead rests on an international effort to prevent the further spread of the parasite, first by working out what caused the outbreak to begin with. There are currently 2 hypotheses at play here. The first suggests it was carried over on boats travelling from the Caribbean. The second is that the pathogen has always been present and climate change has simply provided the conditions to trigger an outbreak. If the latter turns out to be true, scientists say the challenge will be of a magnitude they would have very limited means to address. For Dr. Bronstein and his colleagues, work is underway developing tools to detect the earliest signs possible of an outbreak by using sensitive genetic tools that could essentially create an underwater COVID test for sea urchins. Now, it's at this point in the podcast that I like to change tack a little and bring us to a segment in which we ask, what more is there behind the headline? And this week, that headline is, Disney World steps up critical care for Florida manatees in crisis. Now, this is the partnership between Walt Disney World Florida and the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Program to see Disney adopt a new approach to its long-established manatee care program by transitioning to a short-term critical and acute care center for local manatee populations. The headline story is that Disney wants to help alleviate the mounting pressures on critical care facilities that are currently being overwhelmed and overloaded by Florida manatees in need of urgent care. Disney says that by moving its permanent long-term residents to a new facility elsewhere, it can free up space to provide short-term critical care for between 6 to 8 Florida manatees at a time. This is all very good news, of course, for struggling manatees. But the question behind the headline is, why are Florida manatees facing such a crisis right now? The truth is, there is a crisis being felt among the local manatee population. In a recently released manatee mortality report compiled by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, 72 manatee deaths were recorded last month alone. The West Indian manatee, a species to which the Florida subspecies of manatee belongs, has endured a tough past 3 years in which more than 2,000 have reportedly starved to death in what has been listed as a devastating die-off event. Campaigners and conservationists say blame here rests with the degradation of the local water quality, something that has been subjected to wastewater treatment discharges, leaking septic systems and fertilizer runoff, which has all in turn led to the precipitous decline of seagrass around the coast. Without a healthy supply of seagrass to eat, Florida's manatees have been going hungry. But there's slightly more still to this headline. The death of the 2,000 Florida manatees between 2021 and 2022 is representative of over 20% of the local Florida manatee population. Despite this, and other causes for concern, including warming temperatures driven by climate change, a recent decision taken by the US Fish and Wildlife Service failed to increase the conservation status of the species, listing it as threatened over the higher protection status of endangered. Campaigners say it's a decision that largely ignores the widespread population declines that Florida manatees have recently suffered. Okay, so to make sure we end things this week on a note of positivity, perhaps it's time to draw attention to one of the more bizarre headlines this week. It wouldn't have escaped those paying close attention to the news desk this week that researchers have spotted what is believed to be for the first time ever in broad daylight a rare humpback anglerfish. And it's all been captured on camera. A species usually found at depths somewhere between 200 and 2,000 meters. When this deep-sea creature was spotted swimming near the surface off the coast of Tenerife last week, it became the very definition of an unexpected visitor. Now, at the time of the video's emergence, we reported that this was quite possibly the first time this species had been spotted in broad daylight. Well, consider us re-educated, because since the story broke, we've been contacted by someone, an experienced diver who actually recalls spotting an anglerfish on his dive in waters of around 7 meters deep, back in 1996. His name is John, and he tells us that he spotted the deep-sea fish on a shore dive at Beadnell in Northumberland when he was diving with his local club, Forum Divers of Billingham. As a means of proof, he even provided us with his dive log from 1996, in which he has, in black and white, recorded the sighting, describing the anglerfish as motionless and very ugly. I can think of a number of things to apply that descriptor to, but thank you, John, if you're listening, for bringing that story to life with us. If you've enjoyed this special episode of the Daily Debrief Download, a week in review, be sure to come back for more from us in the usual audio series next week, and do check out the Oceanographic Newsroom, where you can find all this week's headlines and more. This has been the Daily Debrief Download. I've been Rob Hutchings. Thank you for listening.